Hello, and welcome to Reawaken the Dream, a course for writer moms and for anyone who has to do their writing in fragments of time because you can't make your writing the number one priority on your list. If you're in that boat, you've come to the right spot. However, if you're brand new here, this is lesson 11, and you probably want to start back on lesson 1. We are already in our 6th character trait. So if you don't know how they work, you probably want to at least go back to lesson 5 where we begin the study of character traits. So assuming you're with us on lesson 11, welcome to return to Reawaken the Dream, a course for writer moms where we create practical tools to let you write in a limited time that you have available. And currently we are working on the power of living characters, which you will get from the character profile diagram that is now being turned into the character profile tool. So let's do a quick review of what we covered in the last lesson. We were working with self-control, and we said that the animal model for self-control of the struggle was the excitable dog who was just looking every which way and wanting to run in every direction at once. We said that the only really comfortable way of achieving the victory state for self-control was to move it from the rudder, where it's up for grabs, to the wing position, where it's a pretty solid part of your life. But we also noticed with self-control this interesting phenomenon of being able to switch in a flip from the anchor position up to the wing position in a sudden loss of self-control. So did you play with any of that in some of your scenarios? That should have proved some interesting ways of writing. What we noted about self-control is that it's part of the balance group, and that means that everything in the balance group can be overdone or underdone. It's got two sides to the failure state. And similarly, the agency, how much the character is in control of himself, how much self-possession the character has, is always up for grabs when you're having a struggle of a balance variable, a balance trait. Circumstances, limiting self-beliefs, and overwhelm can all limit the agency that the character has at the time the struggle begins, and the outcome of the struggle influences, because if the balance victory is achieved, then greater self-mastery is an output of that. And if the battle is lost, in this case to a loss of self-control, then the amount of agency that the character has diminishes. So it both affects the ability and it rises or falls with the gain or the loss state. And this is going to be true of every one of our balance variables. So are you ready for our new character trait for this week? Our trait for this week is loyalty. Loyalty here, we are not talking about entities at this point. We're talking about people. So we'll have another character trait that regards municipalities, government, states, countries. This here, we're talking about relationships between people. And watch for the counter of loyalty, which is betrayal. And at the same time, watch out for the presence of something that is owed. So now for our scenarios of the week. Veronica was in line at the grocery store, her arms on the cart, waiting for the line to move. It was interminable. One of those awful lines. And to make matters worse, there was an elderly woman in front of her. When space opened up, it took her forever to move up her cart and make more space in the line. All of a sudden, a new checkout line opened up right next door. Veronica was tempted to dash over there, but she couldn't let herself do that. The woman in front of her was there first. So she went up to the woman's cart and said, Ma'am, can I help you? Move over here. This new line is opened up, and see, the checker's waiting for you. Oh, the elderly lady brightened up, and she helped her get over there and then maneuvered behind her in her own cart. And behind her, she could hear someone saying, "No, no, you were here first. You go next." Loyalty. Well, ever since Craig gave notice that he was leaving his job, the atmosphere around the office changed. At least Belinda felt that it really changed. The real question was, who was going to get promoted into Craig's spot? Well, they wouldn't dare hire from the outside, would they? She looked around the office. There were 5 of them. Well, 3 anyway that had enough experience that could really be considered for the post. Well, there was the fellow, the goofball. She could make him look pretty bad at a meeting, because with just the slightest prodding, he would fly off the handle, and that would rule him out. But Belinda, what would she do about Marla? Marla was really popular around the office because she was starting to get everybody's names and birthdays. She was going to get together a thing where once a month they would have a cake in the break room. She was pretty popular, and she really knew her stuff. Belinda was pondering, what could she do? What could she do to make Belinda look bad so that she would get the promotion? Loyalty. Dan hated having his mom drop him off at school. All the other moms drove cool cars like SUVs or vans. His mom drove an old Ford Focus. And what was worse, the passenger door didn't open from the inside, and his mom had to get out of the car and walk around and open his door to let him out. Dan was so embarrassed. And today, to make matters worse, 3 guys who liked to tease him were standing right next to the sidewalk that he had to walk by to get into the school building. Well, got his strength together, and he was going to march right past them and into the building. Well, he got only so far down the sidewalk, and one of the guys stepped out in front of him. Said, "Your mom's a loser. Your mom's a loser. You say so, and we'll let you pass." Well, Dan said, "Well, if being a loser means not being like you, then I'm glad to take the loss." The bully kind of shook his head. Glad to take the loss? Did that mean he won? And in the moment of confusion, Dan rushed past him and into the school building. Loyalty. Rick was hoping his prospects with the girls would be better now that he had started college. So far, it hadn't worked out that way. Didn't help that he was an engineering major, and the prettiest girl in the class, and there weren't very many of them, but the prettiest one already had a boyfriend. He was hopeful, but he didn't really know how he was ever going to get a girlfriend. And to make matters worse, his best friend Tim kept bugging him to introduce him to his sister. His sister was still in high school. Well, Tim said she's only a year younger. She's a senior. Well, Brick had to admit that she looked pretty good now that her braces were off and she had that new hairstyle, but she didn't like the idea of, Tim dating his sister. What if he spent all the time with her and never hung out with him anymore? He was thinking about it, and he thought about, well, there's a post that Tim made about a month ago. If he put the right story with that post could make Tim look like a leech, and his sister wouldn't even want to meet him. He didn't let that thought last even a minute. He couldn't do that, not to Tim and not to his sister. Loyalty. Now we're going to take a look at the triad of emotions for loyalty. Let's take a look first at the struggle. The animal model for the struggle of loyalty is the race for a new source of food. You might say here, well, that's strange. An animal and food? We just had an animal guarding his food when we looked at responsibility. So is this really a different animal model? Well, let me give you a reason why you could understand that it is. Compare these two scenarios. One, the new checkout lane that just opened. We just had that one. Now compare that to somebody eyeing your purse when you're in the grocery store. Very, very different emotions there. Another way to tell it, think of a stand-up comedian. You could have a stand-up comedian start off his scenario by saying, well, I was in the grocery store and the line was endless. All of a sudden, a new line opened up. He's got his audience. Their attention is there. They recognize that. Ooh, new source of food. Woo, woo. And he can very easily produce a comedic twist and they'll be laughing like crazy. He built up the tension with the new checkout lane, new source of food, and then collapse the tension. If it's halfway funny, he'll have them rolling in the aisles. Now compare this to, I was in the grocery store and I was in the produce department and I was checking out peaches and I saw somebody eyeing my purse. It would have been a lot harder to come up with something funny to turn that scenario into something funny. Those two clues will let you know that these are, in fact, separate struggles. The intellect part of the brain is very quick to say, oh, an animal, oh, and food, they belong together. Animal, food, and then we'll break them apart. But that's not the way that the less verbal part of the brain works. To the less verbal part of the brain, those two struggles have nothing in common because the less verbal part of your brain stores emotions as separately by the emotion, and these are different emotions. So it's just another interesting example of needing to get down to the level of the struggle and understand where the struggle is, or you don't get the emotional power. Because that's what we're trying to do with these character traits, is enlist our less verbal side of our brain to help us store the emotional impact of our story. So let's take a look at the lost states of loyalty. The obvious lost state of loyalty is betrayal. Anytime there is a betrayal involved, that is clearly a loss of loyalty. And if you say, well, wait a minute, how does loyalty and a race for food, how do those guys relate? Why is a race for food a model for the struggle between loyalty and betrayal? And I'll give you a real quick clue. Imagine that that dog is in a race with other dogs to that new source of food. Then you will find quickly enough that there's some backbiting. And what do we know about betrayal? Backbiting is another type of betrayal. So now you can see the tie-in between the animal model and the lost state. An empathetic person, a person who really cares about others, should have loyalty as a base trait, or at the very least, a wing trait. And that's probably pretty common amongst most of us and the people that we know. I mean, betrayal is so sad and hurtful that hopefully that's not a common part of your life at all. But the interesting thing is it is a huge part of drama, and it's a very obvious one. This is one of the emotional states that's very well understood. People who write betrayal into a story did not have to take a 35-week course, 28 weeks of which were devoted to character traits. The betrayal, the drama associated with betrayal is very well understood, and it's very, very common in drama, in literature, in all manner of literature. It's a very key state. So then what do you need to know to make your writing distinguished? And for your case, what you need to know is the awareness that you can set it up at an almost level of unawares. And that's where we get in with our scale. Before we dive into the scale, let's take a quick look at victory. What is the state of victory for loyalty? And this is a peculiar one when you think about it, because if you're thinking, well, the animal model is a race, isn't victory winning the race? How could that be a lost state? And the answer to that question comes about with, what do you really value? Does Belinda really, really want that promotion so badly that she's willing to throw Marla under the bus? That's the end of their friendship right there. And not only that, what a mark for Belinda. So when you want to know the victory state of loyalty, you have to ask the question, what do you value? If you're creating a villainous character, no problem. Race to the food. He thinks he's won. He hasn't. He's lost. But you'll have to bring that out later in the story. So let's return now to the concept of modifiers that we brought up briefly when we were talking about the lost state. We have two factors going on in our modifiers here. Scale and stain. We've never seen this word before as a modifier with stain, because we've talked about scale with everything. And we say that scale, we have said in the past, what's at stake determines the scale. If very little is at stake, then it's a low scale. And if something serious is at stake, then it's high in scale. But just as in orderliness, if you didn't file a bill the minute it walked through the door, that's not a stain on your character. It's low scale and low stain. They go together. At worst, you're not quite as tidy as you thought you were. But so these have always kind of gone together in our other character traits. But there's something interesting happening with loyalty, and we'll see it in some other traits as well in the future. The stain of disloyalty is so pronounced, it's like that dye that they put on money at the bank so that if a robber takes it and touches it, he can't get it off his hands. It's the slightest scale in level carries even the heaviest stain. Any betrayal is a big stain, and we've never seen that before. So what produces our scale? Our scale has to do with the closeness of the relationship that was betrayed. If you have betrayed someone who's very dear to you, a family, a precious friend, that's as serious as the scale gets. And as light as the scale gets, that's the casual loyalties of who came first, who got there first, who deserves to be served first. And then the slightly heavier things like a seatmate, an audience member, a fellow passenger. You see how we use these words, even with these casual relationships, we use words that apply that we're in this together. So whenever you're in a situation where you're in it together with someone, you have some amount of loyalty at stake. And that's your lightest scale. So let's take a look at the group that loyalty belongs to. Loyalty belongs to the empathy group. Surprise, surprise. We previously had the trait of responsibility, the dog defending his food, and now we have loyalty, the race to a new source of food. How do these compare? Because these have an interesting component that also makes them different. That's what makes these character traits endlessly fascinating, is all these subtleties. Responsibility. If you don't keep up with your part of the two-person job that you promised your buddy you'd do, you've failed in responsibility and you've let your friend down. But if it was a presentation before a group of people and you don't do your part and that leaves your friend with egg on his face, then that's disloyalty. So what's the difference here? Responsibility is a two-party issue. You and the buddy that you owed your share of the job. Loyalty always involves three agencies, three separate agents. The audience against whom, to whom you were, how do I say this? You're the person that you were disloyal to, the victim, and the person that you betrayed them to. So you always have three parties in a disloyalty. So now we get to a very, very exciting phase. We're actually going to enter a whole new phase of the course. And I'm so excited about it. We've been teasing this, but we are about to begin to turn the character profile diagram into a character profile tool. So last time we reviewed our traits and their position on the diagram. We said that the aspiration, level of aspiration was our pinnacle trait. Our wing traits we called the level of chaos. Our rudder traits were awareness. Our anchor traits were stability. And our base traits were the being traits. We've used a lot more of these words: the base, anchor, rudder, wing, and pinnacle. So now we're going to, as part of our tool, today we're going to talk about the mechanics of the character profile tool. And then in the coming two videos after this one, we'll talk about how we use it to become a tool. First thing you notice with these diagrams, you've probably noticed that I've been reusing this image because drawing the circle and getting the lines is a lot of work. Well, if we're going to be making a character profile diagram for each and every character that we ever write in the story, we need a really fast and easy way to create a character profile diagram. And the good news is that it doesn't take any fancy drawing to do this. So here's an example of the formula that we're going to use. We're going to use our 4x6 cards, and we'll use the line front where we have the front side of the card is lined. And we'll use 5 lines. It only takes 5 lines on the card to nail our character profile diagram. You'll want to center it on the card because you'll remember that we can have more than one character trait in pinnacle and more than one character trait in base. So we'll just center it up, down on the card. And then as we have our character traits assigned to our character, we'll write them in top center, bottom center, left and right in the middle. You can see how I've positioned them to suggest a circle. That's all it takes. And you can write one of these out, whether you put the little dot and the lines on it or not, that's up to you, but they go on just as fast. So you can make one of these super quick. To give you an example, I'm going to go back to a character that's actually from the book that I'm writing. And my project is 4510. That's because you guys are my 4400 project. So my character is 4510071, my character Sarah. We met her a while back. She was the character who does not have circumspection. So here's how I show that she doesn't have circumspection, that it's in the wing position. if this were aligned, you'd even be able to see it more clearly. So we demonstrated that she did not have circumspection in the scenario that I presented in an earlier lesson. And I told you at that time that we're going to also show her in the future that she has orderliness. So these two traits are the only ones assigned to Sarah. Sarah is a very minor character, and her purpose in the story is to demonstrate the character traits of characters that are more important to the story. But she has a cute little twist role too. And but you can see that all of these other trait positions are open for her because we didn't need to assign them. If it turns out as the story progresses and as I write more, it may well be that some of these other trait positions will be filled in. But you will find that when you write, you will make a character profile diagram even for the tiniest bit character, even if that character just has one scene and only one character trait. Because beginning next week when we talk about how these are created, the other aspect of creating these, you'll see why that's important. The next tool that we're going to create is a cheat sheet. I'll show you what I've got going, but these are the real ones for me, but I've got some to show you that you can read more easily. And for me, it's just 2 sheets of paper. And this for me is, I'll lay it out for you in just a minute, but it's a reference sheet. I've got mine done on page protectors because I'm going to be using it a lot. And this is something that as you create this is going to be part of your tool. So it's all mechanics today. How do you create this? And we'll go through how you build one of these in just a second here. But I'd like to let you know it's actually possible to purchase one of these, not from me, but from one of the sources from which I get my stuff. I'm not going to give you the sources till the end because I don't want you running on ahead, but you might want to know that it will be possible to buy one and it's even laminated. But I actually suggest that you make one because I think the one that you make yourself will be the one that you actually use. So let's see, how do we make it? That was your intro. Now let's see how this works. We're going to begin with each sheet will be of this same design. You'll have the group at the top and then draw a line and then put the commonalities of the group. And then a line, and you're going to be doing each trait as you learn those traits. For example, in the balance right now, we have orderliness and self-control. So my balance page has 2 traits. And for each of them, we'll give the struggle, the loss, and the victory states. So let's see how that's going to work. The traits do not come evenly divided. There's 28 of them, but they do not come 7, 7, 7, 7. Not even close. By far the commonest is the empathy group. The empathy group has no fewer than 13 character traits. Well, I would never be able to get 13 on my sheets, especially since mine are wide ruled. But what I can do is I can pair empathy up with insight. Insight only has 3 character traits. So I can extend empathy and continue it on the bottom part of insight. And if I make those sheets the inside, then I've got all of empathy right in front of me. Balance can go on one side by itself. It has 7 character traits. And resilience can go on a page by itself. It has 5 character traits. So what we're going to do this week is we're going to actually build those out. Those are reference sheets, and you will find that you will use them constantly in your work. And starting Next week, we're going to talk about how we begin to interact these sheets. So we have some homework for you, of course, and your homework is in the PDF file. If you don't choose to get the PDF file for some reason, then what you need to be doing is setting up some scenarios for yourself where you practice loyalty. Because if you remember, week to week to week to week, the number one thing that we want to be able to do is say the word loyalty and have our less verbal side of our brain awaken to exactly what that means, just the way our very first introduction when we said, do you want to take the DOG for a WALK? We want that quicker response. So be sure to practice the character trait of loyalty, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.